Don't do it! Don't make this crucial mistake when ordering your M2 MacBook Air. That's what I'm telling you now because we have learned a lot of information about the M2 architecture from the recent release of the M2 MacBook Pro, and we learned some very interesting information about how Apple is configuring these new M2 Macs to save costs by offering cheaper components that may not be as fast as you were expecting. So for this video, I want to go over some things we've learned about the leaked release date for the M2 MacBook Air, some things we have learned about the M2 chip, and some configurations you may want to avoid, as well as some other general tidbits to follow before ordering this laptop. All right, let's get started, and I won't hold you here. If you just wanted the release date info, we're covering that first. So when Apple announced the M2 MacBook Air, they gave just a vague release date of later next month. And as today is the first day of July when posting this video, this is the month that the M2 MacBook Air will go on sale. However, luckily for you, we actually have a leaked release date for the M2 MacBook Air with an exact date. This comes as an exclusive from Mac Rumors, saying that their retail sources are saying that the M2 MacBook Air will go on sale Friday, July 15th, with pre-orders going live the week before on Friday, July 8th. So there's the release date. If that's all you were here for, well, I'm sad to see you go. And I'm a good host, so I will play you a beautiful send-off on your journey, leaving the Greg's Gadgets multiverse. Oh. You're still here. I guess I better finish this video with some more useful information. And I do have useful information about these pre-orders to avoid some common mistakes. The first mistake to avoid is how you configure these MacBook models. If you want the new M2 MacBook Air at the time of release date, because if this is anything like the chaos of the M2 MacBook Pro launch, there's going to be some configurations that will not be available on launch day. So if we look on Apple's website, we can see two standard configurations being offered for the base model M2 MacBook Air. One with a binned 8-core GPU chip for the M2, and then 256 gigabytes of SSD storage space, and also 8 gigabytes of memory for $1,199, and then a second base model with a higher starting storage of 512 gigabytes, a fully binned 10-core GPU M2 chip, and a 35-watt dual USB-C charger, or an optional 67-watt single USB-C fast charger. Now, these two models are likely to be the only models you can order on Apple's website or walk into the store and order on day one. And configuring these models with more memory could have you waiting weeks before they are readily available. I say this because this is exactly what happened with the M2 MacBook Pro launch, and some of the higher tiered models for that launch, like models with 24 gigabytes of unified memory, could be ordered, but they did not start shipping until the end of July into early August. So if you want a configuration for day one, make sure you check the order dates as you configure out your MacBook Air, because it's likely the two base models will be the only models available for pickup or for delivery on day one. Furthermore, you may want to be careful about what base model you pick. Now, the M2 MacBook Pro has revealed quite a lot about this new M2 MacBook Air, and it might be a step back in some areas. One of those areas has to do with SSD speed on the base 256 gigabyte model, which is likely to be slower than the previous storage speed offered on the M1 MacBook Air. I base this information off the M2 MacBook Pro, which instead of using two 128 gigabyte SSDs to get 256 gigabytes of storage, has changed this configuration to just one 256 gigabyte SSD. Because of this, even though you're getting the same storage size, there is a sacrifice in speed, because if you had two SSD drives making up that 256 gigabytes, you can read and write to both drives at once, which would increase the speed. The new base model can only utilize one speed of one solid-state drive, meaning the read and write speeds are basically almost half the speed of what you would find on the old M1 MacBook Pro or M1 MacBook Air. This is a pretty significant downgrade over the older model, which are almost 2 years old at this point. Now, will most users notice the decrease in SSD speed? Honestly, probably not, especially the audience that this M2 MacBook Air is targeted at. However, if you want the faster SSD, my recommendation I would make to you anyway is to step up to the 512 gigabyte SSD. This configuration will provide you with two separate 256 gigabyte SSDs working together to make 512 gigabytes of total storage, and that will have the faster read and write speeds. And on top of that, it's just just more storage. 256 gigabytes for a modern laptop is just a low amount of storage, and I think most users would feel more comfortable with the 512 gigabyte model, especially if you plan on keeping this laptop for the long haul. Now, I am very interested to learn from everyone in the comments below. What do you think about this SSD controversy? Does the SSD speed decrease on the base model mean you won't be purchasing that model? And did this change upset you? Or do you think tech reviewers are making too big of a deal about it? So do me a favor and let me know your opinion below. Now, another mistake you might want to avoid with this new M2 MacBook Air has to do with the specifications on this M2 chip. And that's because after testing out the M2 MacBook Pro, it has become apparent that the M2 chip is running hotter than the previous M1 chip. This makes sense because the M2 chip is physically bigger than the M1 chip and comes packed with an even bigger 10-core GPU over the M1 chip's max 8-core GPU. The increase in this heat that the M2 now generates caused my M2 MacBook Pro's fans to spin up during intensive CPU benchmarking, which granted is something we should expect from pretty much any laptop. However, it was notable that my old M1 MacBook Pro, even during my initial benchmarks, the fan did not audibly spin up once. What this means for the M2 MacBook Air is that it is likely to thermal throttle significantly, considering that the overall body of the M2 Air is thinner and it does not have the active cooling system like the M2 MacBook Pro. Now, for most users, again, this will probably not be a big deal. The M2 MacBook Air is aimed at consumer level users and non-professionals, and even though it's not being aimed at those users, don't get me wrong, the M2 chip is extremely capable. So basically, don't be worried about the M2 thermal throttling. I'm sure this MacBook Air is going to be plenty fast. And remember, even the M1 MacBook Air thermal throttled after a sustained workload, so this is nothing new with this laptop. However, with that being said, one configuration I might avoid on this new Air with the M2 chip is the one with the full 10-core GPU. I say this for two reasons. First of all, the 8-core GPU version is likely to run cooler than the version with the full 10-core GPU, and because the M2 Air thermal throttles, it's likely you won't be able to utilize the full potential of that 10-core GPU, meaning it will be a waste of money spending $100 extra to get that full 10-core chip. I will add the disclaimer that this isn't confirmed, and it'll require real-world testing to find that out. But I think it's fair to make the assumption that with the thinner body overall and the increased heat output by the M2 chip, the 10-core GPU version likely won't be a good choice to add on for most users. And if you're not doing anything GPU intensive on your MacBook Air anyway, this is something you don't need to worry about at all. It would just be wasted extra power on you. Okay, I think we covered some pretty important topics I couldn't cover before the M2 MacBook Pro came out, and hopefully these insights into the M2 Air have helped you make your purchasing decision. But one last bit of warning as we get closer to the July 8th pre-order date. My last bit of advice if you want this laptop within the next month is to order it right away. Listen, the M2 MacBook Pro was not exciting, and therefore the base model did not see a delay in shipping time. But I can't say the same for the M2 Air. This laptop is hotly anticipated, and I think it's going to sell very, very well. And it'll probably sell out quickly, so if you want this MacBook soon, pre-order right away. If there's something you don't like about it, or maybe the reviews got something wrong, well, maybe you'll want to take advantage of Apple's 14-day return period. Because if you don't pre-order or don't get one from the Apple Store on the first day of it being available, it is very likely you will face a long delay waiting for this MacBook, and quite frankly, I think all of you have waited long enough for this machine. We have been talking about M2s for quite some time, and now they're finally here, so you really don't want to miss out on it if this is the laptop you've been waiting for. And you've waited long enough for this video to end, so if you're still here, well, let me know in the comments below by saying hi, or say fresh mutts, fresh mutts. Fresh mutts. That's how we'll know that you're a true fan and not one of those phonies. And don't forget to drop a like, subscribe for the full M2 MacBook Air review, and thank you again so much for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.